Today, we will talk about the topics in finals. First, we will talk about the anticyclones and other pressure systems. And now, let's talk about cyclones. Cyclones is a storm or system of winds that rotates around a center of lower atmospheric pressure. It is formed by converging air. The air from the surface is converging and rise to the atmosphere, and that is why it's called low pressure. That will result of rains, flood, and etc. While anticyclones is a system of winds where rotates around the center of high atmospheric pressure. And it is formed by the air diverging at the surface. This time, the air pressure pushed down to the earth and makes the air pressure more greater. And now, let's talk about the pressure system. First, we will talk about the ridge. Ridge is a term in meteorology that talks about or describing an elongated area of relatively high atmospheric pressure that compared to the surrounding environment. Ridge can be presented in two ways. On surface weather maps, the pressure isobars from contours where the maximum pressure is found along the axis of the ridge. And in upper air maps, the geopotential height isohypes form similar contours where the maximum defines the ridge. And now, let's talk about true. A true is an elongated region of relatively low atmospheric pressure without close isobaric contour that define it as a low pressure area. A true is the result of movements of air in atmosphere. In regions where there is upward movement near the ground and divergence at altitude, there is a loss of mass. The pressure becomes lower at this point. There are two types of true. First is the inverted true and the lee-side true. The first true is the inverted true. The true which is oriented opposite to the most trues of the mid-latitude. And next is the lee true. A lee true, also known as the dynamic true, which is a pressure true formed on the lee side of the mountain range. Now let's talk about the col. A col is also known as the saddle point or a neutral point. The point of intersection of a true and the ridge in the pressure pattern of the weather map. And now, let's talk about the types of col. The types of col is the symmetric, anticyclonic, and the cyclonic. Anticyclonic. In the anticyclonic col is the curvature of the high pressure area isobars, which is greater than that is the cyclonic flow. The cyclonic. In the cyclonic col, the curvature of the cyclonic isobars is greater than that of the anticyclonic flow. And in symmetric saddle area, the anticyclonic and cyclonic flows are in balance. In week 2, we tackle about the ship's code and decode book, and also we came up in how to read the symbols and colors in weather maps. With this type of topic, this improves my knowledge in understanding about the weather. The ship code and also the symbols makes the information or the data that has been gathered short and easy to put in the weather map. The example of symbols in weather maps are Zulu, Z, and UTC on weather maps, and also the high and low pressure centers, and also the isobars, weather fronts and features, and also the surface weather station pilots, weather map symbols for current weather, and sky covers symbols, and also weather map symbols for clouds, and wind direction and wind speed symbols, and also the precipitation areas and symbols. And now, let's talk about the Zulu, Z, and UTC on weather maps. This figure is included on weather maps so that all the meteorological weather observation can be reported at the same standardized time on no matter what the local time might be. And now, let's talk about the high and low air pressure centers on weather maps. In weather maps, they use large letters to indicate the high and low air pressure. For the high pressure, they use the large H, which has a color blue, and the large L for low pressure and has a color of red. And now, let's talk about isobars on weather maps. In weather maps, you may notice lines that encircling the highs and lows. These lines are called isobars because they connect areas of air pressures where air pressures are the same. And now, let's talk about the weather fronts and features. First, let's talk about the warm fronts. Warm fronts are indicates as the red curved lines with semicircles, and the cold front are blue curved lines with triangles. And the stationary fronts have alternating sections of red curve with semicircles and blue curve with triangles. And the Euclid front has purple curved lines with both semicircle and triangle. And now, let's talk about the surface weather station plots. Some of surface weather maps includes numbers and symbols which known as the surface weather station plots. And station plots describes weather at the station location. Let's talk about the surface weather for current weather. They tell us what weather condition is currently happening at that particular station location. These symbols can be only plotted if some type of precipitation is occurring or some weather events reducing the visibility at the time of observation. Let's talk about the weather forecasting. There are several types of weather messages. First is the weather warnings, forecast messages, analysis and prognosis messages, and synoptic messages. Let's talk about first the weather warnings. In maritime, there are 4 types of weather warnings. First is the small craft warning, which has a wind speed of 20 to 33 knots and wave heights of 2 to 3 meters. The next weather warning is the gale warning that has a wind speed of 34 to 47 knots and the wave height is 6 to 9 meters. Next is the storm warning, which has a wind speed of 48 to 63 knots and wave heights of 9 to 16 meters. And lastly is the hurricane that has a wind speed of 64 knots above and wave heights of 16 meters above. And now let's talk about the weather maps. A weather map displays various meteorological features across a particular area at a particular point in time and has various symbols which all have specific meanings. Analysis maps are based on weather observation from which patterns of high and lows as well as the locations of weather fronts are drawn. And the prognostic charts are maps which displays what the weather is expected to be like at the future time, in other words, a forecast map. And now, let's talk about the forecasting techniques and methods. The technique used with surface analysis in charts tracking the weather is based on the idea that the past is the indicator of the future. Now, let's talk about the forecasting methods. The first forecasting method is the historical forecasting. It is a forecasting method which based on history or predicting the weather by assuming that what will happen in the past will happen again. This time is one of the most used forecasting method that predicts or tracks the hurricane. The next forecasting method is the persistence method. It is one of the most simplest methods of forecasting the weather is to assume that it will not change for a little while. This technique is often reliable over periods of minutes or hours. The next forecasting method is the method that is more reliable and versatile of short-term forecasting involves the assume that a current tendency or trend will continue or that observed cycle will repeat. This is known as the trend forecasting. The next forecasting method is the synoptic weather forecasting. It is done by assembling weather maps of large regions from observed and reported data at numerous stations. And lastly, the numerical forecasting method is more like digital communication in which the variables are broken up into small parcels or packets and the behaviors of the whole system is deducted by brute force of calculations based on a law of physics. With this kind of topic, we know that this is the most important thing in sailing at the sea, especially as a seafarer, future seafarer. We will overcome or face a terrible weather that would risk our lives and also our voyage. So in this kind of topic, we would know what would the means to predict the weather and to avoid it so that we would have a safe and peaceful voyage. Thank you and good day.